My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 68 years old, a retired accountant, and I've lived in Raytown for most of my life. My late husband, George, and I raised 2 children in the same house we bought 3.5 decades ago. Now it's just me, and that's mostly fine. I like the silence. I like knowing where every drawer creaks. But 2 months away is still too long when you're missing someone small. I had just returned from visiting my daughter Prudence in New Haven. She's wonderful, successful, busy, always rushing between her gallery and city dinners. I love her, but her world spins fast. I missed my garden, and I missed Lily, my son Fletcher's daughter, more than I expected. After unpacking, I walked to their house. The yard hadn't been touched in weeks. The garden Fletcher once cared for like a second child was now dry, the flower beds smothered by weeds. I knocked. Doreen opened the door, his wife from her first marriage, and it took her a moment too long to smile. "Evelyn, we weren't expecting you." "I just got back," I said, stepping inside. "Wanted to see everyone." The house was loud. Lance and Marissa, Doreen's children, shouted over a game show. Chip crumbs and soda cans littered the table. Lance barely glanced up. Marissa asked if I brought presents. No one said, "Welcome back." No one asked about my trip. I asked for Lily. Doreen looked up, startled. "She's upstairs. Homework." She didn't call her down. The kitchen had changed. A new microwave. A coffee maker fancier than my daughter's. Expensive, considering Fletcher's salary hadn't shifted much, or so he'd said during one of his regular calls asking for roof repairs. I said nothing, just listened, watched. Doreen made tea. We talked, briefly, about Prudence, about the city. Then I asked gently how Lily was doing. "She's quiet," Doreen said. "We might take her to a child psychologist. She doesn't socialize well. Maybe she just needs more time with the people who love her." "We give all the kids attention," Doreen answered, clipped. "But we have 3. 3. She always said it like that, as though Lily wasn't quite part of the count. And then I saw her. A soft sound on the stairs, thin shoulders, wide eyes. She clung to the railing. "Grandma," she whispered. I opened my arms. She ran into them. I hadn't realized how small she'd gotten. Her shirt was too tight. Her arms trembled. "I'm back for good," I told her. "We'll see each other often." Before I could ask anything more, Doreen reminded her about homework. Lily's smile disappeared in an instant. She turned and went upstairs without a word. Something in that silence stayed with me. I didn't say anything that night, but I began to watch, carefully. And the more I watched, the more I began to see. One of the most powerful revenge stories doesn't begin with anger, but with the quiet realization that someone you love is being erased day by day. Share your own stories of walking away in the comments. Thank you so much for watching and supporting our channel. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being sensitive, but the following Saturday, I decided to stop by unannounced. I brought a book about dinosaurs for Lily and a box of chocolates for Fletcher. Doreen usually worked weekends. I thought I might have a few quiet minutes with my granddaughter. As I turned into their street, I heard shouting before I reached the door. The kitchen window was open. Fletcher's voice, sharp and loud, cut through the morning. "I told you to clean this mess earlier. Look at the floor," a small voice answered. "I tried, Daddy, but—" "No excuses. Wipe it, now." I paused outside the window. Lily stood on a step stool, scrubbing the floor with a rag, her small hands moving nervously. Fletcher stood over her, pointing at crumbs on the counter. Lance and Marissa watched from the hallway, amused. "She's going to cry," Marissa whispered. "She always cries," Lance smirked. Neither Fletcher nor Doreen stopped them. Fletcher pressed a towel into Lily's hand. 10 minutes, or no cartoons." I stepped back and rang the front bell. The door opened faster than usual. Lance's face changed the moment he saw me. "Grandma." Fletcher followed, all smiles. "Mom, we were just tidying up." "I brought something for Lily," I said. "Can I see her?" "She's in the kitchen, helping out." "Helping or working?" He chuckled. "Chores are good for kids." "And what about the other two?" "They have school stuff. Lily's younger. We're teaching her responsibility." I walked into the kitchen. Lily looked up, startled. Her shirt was damp. Her eyes lit up for a moment, then dimmed. I bent to hug her. She trembled in my arms. "I brought a book," I whispered. "Dinosaurs." Her hands clutched it tightly. "Thank you, Grandma." Fletcher stepped behind me. "She needs to finish cleaning." I turned. "I think she's done enough. Maybe Lance and Marissa can do their share." "They've got assignments," he said. "Lily's fine." "No," I said quietly. "She's not." His smile faltered. I sent Lily upstairs with her book. Then I turned to Fletcher. "I heard you from the street." He blinked. "She's 6, Fletcher, and she's being treated like the maid while the others laugh." He rubbed his face. "You're overreacting." I shook my head. "You used to know better." "It's not a big deal," he said. "They're just teasing." "It is a big deal," I said, "because only one child is cleaning, and only one seems afraid." He didn't answer, just looked away. "I'll be visiting more often," I said, "to spend time with Lily." Still no reply, but his face shifted. The mask was starting to slip. The next week, I arrived each afternoon just before Lily returned from school. Doreen didn't like it. Her tone was polite but clipped, but Fletcher said nothing, which was all the permission I needed. I never came empty-handed. Sometimes books, sometimes strawberries. Once, a small box of paints. Lily never asked for anything. She accepted each offering like a child who had learned long ago not to expect more than what appeared. But she smiled, and that smile had started to come a little sooner each time I knocked. The third afternoon, I found her in the laundry room, kneeling on a towel, scrubbing the tile grout with a toothbrush. Her backpack lay unopened beside the door. I crouched beside her and asked how her day had been. She said it was fine. Then, after a pause, she added that Marissa had told her she smelled like mop water. I said nothing. I took the brush from her hand and told her we would go sit outside. She hesitated, then followed. We sat under the dogwood tree where George once hung a swing. The swing was gone now, so was George. But the light came through the branches the same way it always had. She spoke very little that day, just small facts. Her teacher liked blue dresses. The class turtle had disappeared. Someone had brought cupcakes but didn't bring enough. But every so often, she looked at me like she was trying to measure whether I was still real, whether this quiet space would still be here tomorrow. That night, I went home and pulled out the manila folder I hadn't touched in months. It held copies of mortgage payments, utility bills, transfer receipts, all the support I'd given Fletcher since they moved in. I hadn't looked at the numbers in detail before. I'd just paid. But now, under my kitchen light, I reviewed every line. There were things I'd forgotten: the new fence, the replacement washer, the orthodontist deposit for Marissa. I'd signed each check without question. George used to say, generosity doesn't need applause, but it does need boundaries. I had mistaken silence for grace. I had given without asking how it was being used. I made an appointment with my lawyer the next morning. The house was still in my name. I had never transferred the deed. Fletcher thought I had. He'd sent me a message months ago, thanking me for the gift, assuming a signature had happened. But it hadn't. I'd never followed through. Some part of me, even then, had hesitated. I left the office that afternoon with a list of quiet instructions and a copy of my updated trust. Lily's name was now listed clearly, her future protected, at least on paper. Back at their house, Doreen met me at the door. She looked tired, her makeup half finished, her hair pinned up in sections. She said the dishwasher was acting up. I said I'd ask someone to look at it. Her face shifted, just a flicker of unease. I knew then that she'd stopped thinking of my help as kindness. She'd started thinking of it as a given. That night, I watched from the couch as Fletcher reminded Lily to clean her room before dinner. Lance had left his backpack in the middle of the floor. Marissa was eating cereal out of the box. Doreen said nothing to either of them. But when Lily passed through the hallway with her arms full of books, Fletcher told her to hurry up. No one offered to help. No one noticed her slip on the edge of the rug. I did. I watched her catch herself. No sound, just a quick intake of breath, and keep going. It was a small moment, one of hundreds, but something inside me shifted with it. Not rage, not shock, just a slow, tightening resolve. This wasn't a home, not for her, and I had already waited too long. It was a Wednesday when the decision took shape, not as a grand plan, but as something quieter. I had come by as usual. Doreen had just left for work. Fletcher was upstairs, shouting into his headset about a conference call that hadn't started on time. The house felt louder than usual, though no one was speaking to each other. The television blinked bright colors to no audience. The hallway smelled faintly of scorched toast and bleach. I found Lily alone at the dining table, tracing over letters in a workbook meant for children much younger than her. She had her legs tucked under the chair, her spine too straight. On the table sat a list in Doreen's handwriting: fold towels, vacuum stairs, rinse patio table. Next to each task was Lily's name. I searched for any sign that the others had chores. There was none. I sat beside her. She looked up and smiled, then quickly back down. Her pencil moved with care. I noticed the way she held it, gripping too tightly, pressing too hard. The paper beneath her hand had already begun to tear. I asked if she wanted to come for a walk, just the two of us. She hesitated. I have to clean the patio. I told her the patio could wait. We walked down the street in silence, past the hedge where George used to trim the edges by eye. Past the mailbox Lily once helped me repaint in yellow. At the park, she sat beside me on the bench, shoes swinging just above the gravel. She didn't speak much, just small observations: a squirrel with a limp, a boy throwing breadcrumbs at birds, a dog in a stroller. But her body softened in the quiet. Her shoulders dropped. She leaned her head against my arm and closed her eyes. It wasn't until we were walking home that she said, very quietly, "Do you think I'll get in trouble?" For the walk? For leaving the list? I didn't answer right away. At their doorstep, I paused. Fletcher's car was still in the driveway. The living room lights flickered behind the curtain, and I realized I didn't want to open that door again. I knelt in front of her and looked into her eyes. "How would you feel about staying at my house for a little while?" She didn't smile. She didn't jump. She just nodded. "I have books, and the garden needs help, and the swing is still there if we fix the rope." Her eyes stayed fixed on mine, still measuring, still unsure. "But don't we need permission?" "No, we need a toothbrush and your shoes." She ran upstairs. I waited at the bottom, unsure if she'd be stopped, but no one called after her. No one followed. She came back down with a small backpack, clutched to her chest. We walked back the way we came, but everything had changed. I could feel it in the way her steps grew lighter, in the way she looked around, not as someone scanning for danger, but as someone waking up. At my house, I showed her to the spare room, the one with the yellow curtains. She touched the windowsill like it was a museum exhibit. I made us tea, weak and sweet. She drank it carefully, two hands around the mug. That night, I found her asleep on the couch, book open on her chest, glasses sliding down her nose. I covered her with a blanket. My heart ached at how small she looked in the silence of a house that asked nothing of her. I left a message on Fletcher's phone, simple, clear. Lily's with me. She's safe. Don't come by tonight. I turned off the ringer after I hung up. I knew it would come. The reaction, the protest, the accusations. But I also knew this. I wasn't asking anymore. I wasn't observing, tolerating, measuring. I was done waiting for someone else to do better. That night, Lily slept through the storm of my decision. And I, for the first time in months, slept through the night. Fletcher showed up the next morning, not with shouting, not with panic, just a kind of deliberate quiet that he'd used since he was a teenager. It was the same stillness he once used when he was caught doing something he couldn't defend and knew better than to try. He parked too close to the roses, walked to the porch without looking around. He didn't knock, just stood, waiting for me to come out. I had been expecting him. There had been no calls, no messages, not even a text to ask how Lily was. Only silence. And I had long since learned that silence was his chosen method of punishment. But I was no longer standing on the same ground where his anger once held weight. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. Lily was in the back room, safe with a puzzle and a mug of milk. He stayed at the edge of the porch, like he didn't know whether he had the right to enter. He didn't ask for her, didn't even say her name, just said, I had made things harder than they needed to be, that I was interfering, that I didn't understand the dynamics of a blended household. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I let his words unfold in careful, controlled sentences, each one crafted not to acknowledge what I'd seen, only to cast it as misinterpretation. I had misunderstood the structure, he said. Lily was learning discipline. The other children had other needs. I didn't know the whole picture, but I did, and I had. I watched his eyes more than his mouth, watched how they moved quickly when he mentioned money, how they darted downward when I asked if he'd noticed Lily had stopped smiling, how he stiffened slightly when I told him she had already memorized which stairs creaked, which hallways echoed, and which rooms didn't belong to her. He warned me, gently but clearly, that I was complicating things, that he didn't want this to go in a direction it didn't need to. I let the warning land and didn't respond. What I said instead was simple, that she was safe here, that no one was yelling, that no one was handing her a mop instead of a welcome. I told him I had no intention of arguing, but I also had no intention of sending her back, not while things remained as they were. He didn't shout, that wasn't his way. He just narrowed his eyes and said that I was making a mistake. And then, just before he left, he asked a quiet question, not about Lily, but about the house. Is it still in your name? He asked, like it had only just occurred to him. Yes, I said. It always was. That was the first crack. It didn't split wide, but it showed. He left without another word. I watched his back retreat down the path, slow and rigid, like someone walking away from a room where they weren't sure what had just shifted, only that something had. Inside, Lily was waiting by the window, still holding the puzzle piece she hadn't placed yet. I sat beside her and helped her finish it. We didn't talk about Fletcher. We didn't talk about the house. We just made sure every piece found its place. But in the quiet, I could already feel the next part beginning. Fletcher's visit didn't rattle me. If anything, it clarified the next step. He hadn't come to understand. He had come to reassert control. And when control began to slip, he defaulted to what he had always leaned on, power through implication. But he had forgotten something. I wasn't new to any of this. I had lived through years of navigating silence, pride, and disappointment. He had underestimated what a mother stores away, what a grandmother prepares for, even without knowing she's preparing. That afternoon, I opened the cabinet in the hallway, the one with the 3-ring binders and old receipts tucked behind outdated holiday cards. I hadn't needed to organize my records in a long time, but the habit never left me. Each envelope had dates, each transaction stapled to its purpose, every wire transfer for school supplies, every reimbursement they never got around to filing, every repair I quietly paid for. I didn't keep those documents out of suspicion. I kept them because I was the one who always remembered what everyone else chose to forget. I brought the stack to the dining table. The paper smelled faintly of ink and time. I read through the notes I had once scribbled in the corners. Roof leak, handled. Lance's braces, deposit made. Gas bill, 3 months behind, covered. What struck me was not the money, but the way no one had ever asked if I could. They had simply assumed I would. Among the pile, I found the letter I had drafted for the bank the year they moved in, asking about co-ownership transfer. The signature line was blank. I had never mailed it. George's death had been recent, and something in me, grief perhaps, or instinct, had held back. Now, that hesitation felt less like delay and more like foresight. The next morning, I returned to the lawyer's office. He was kind, listened carefully, helped me notarize a declaration of temporary guardianship. It wasn't custody, but it was a step. It gave me the right to make medical decisions, school-related choices, day-to-day protection. It gave me something more important than leverage. It gave Lily stability. I made a second file and kept a copy for myself. Then I sent a brief, courteous note to Fletcher and Doreen outlining the legal arrangement. No threats, no accusations, just a line that said, "Until circumstances improve and stability is assured, Lily will remain in my care with appropriate documentation in place." They didn't reply, but the silence was different this time, less composed, more fractured. That evening, Lily helped me with dinner. She was beginning to hum again, just small tunes, barely audible, but they returned like the scent of something familiar after a long absence. We planted basil by the kitchen window. She insisted on pressing each seed herself, said the soil needed to feel her fingertips. Later, when she slept, I stood in the doorway of her room. The yellow curtains moved gently in the breeze. Her breathing was steady. Her hands curled near her face, not clenched like before. I thought about the time Fletcher was her age, when I worked double shifts and came home to find him asleep under the table, clutching a flashlight. He had always been afraid of storms. I would sit beside him, whispering that the thunder was just the sky, clearing its throat. He believed me. But now, the storms he created weren't outside the house. They lived in the rooms he refused to see. I turned away from the doorway and walked down the hall. The documents were already sealed in their folder, tucked into the drawer beneath the teapot and the family silver, not hidden, just ready. And I understood then that this wasn't a conflict over who was right. It was a quiet undoing of what had been wrong for too long. 2 weeks passed with no response from Fletcher or Doreen. Lily stayed with me, and the house adapted to her rhythm as naturally as a room adjusting to light. She didn't ask to go back. She didn't bring up her siblings. She moved through the days with a careful kind of grace, like she was learning how to live in a space that didn't ask her to shrink. We went to the library every Thursday. We planted parsley next to the basil. She drew a cat with a crown and taped it to the fridge. I kept her routine simple, reading, dinner, sleep, but the silence between us became softer, no longer filled with fear. Her voice grew stronger, though never loud, just steady, like she was reclaiming the sound of herself. Then one morning, the phone rang. It was the school counselor. She asked if we could meet. We sat across from each other in the small office with laminated posters and paper butterflies taped to the blinds. The counselor's voice was kind but firm. She said Lily's teacher had noticed some things, changes. Lily had started smiling in class, participating, raising her hand, but she had also said a few things softly when no one asked her to, about cleaning while the others played, about earning dinner, about folding clothes before she was allowed to do her homework. The counselor said this wasn't the first time Lily had mentioned it, but it was the first time someone had listened long enough to write it down. I gave her a copy of the guardianship document. She nodded, quietly relieved. Then she asked a question I hadn't expected. Would you be willing to speak at the next parent conference? It wasn't about confrontation. It was about clarity. The school had seen enough now to want a record. I agreed. The meeting was held in the multipurpose room. Bright lights, metal chairs. A few parents scattered through the space, holding coffee cups and tension. I spoke for 6 minutes, calmly, factually, no accusation, just explanation. Lily's pattern of attendance, her behavior shifts, her regression, her improvement. Doreen showed up halfway through. She sat in the back, arms folded, jaw tight. When it ended, she approached me, voice low. You always were too soft. I looked at her, not as a rival, not even as a mother, just as a woman, standing too deep in her own illusion to see what was already slipping. The school disagrees, I said simply. She scoffed and left, but her timing was off. She had walked in too late. The principal had already heard. The counselor had already filed the note. The teachers had already seen the difference between a child surviving and a child breathing. The next morning, Fletcher called. For the first time in weeks, his tone was clipped. He said things were being taken out of context, that it was starting to look bad, that I was turning people against the family, but I hadn't said anything untrue. I hadn't needed to. People had eyes, and now they were looking. That night, Lily asked if she could sleep with the curtains open. I asked why. Because I don't need to hide anymore, she said. She fell asleep holding the flashlight I'd given her, not out of fear, but habit. By morning, she didn't need it, and I realized Doreen had been right about one thing. I was soft, but not in the way she meant, not weak, not naive, just quiet enough to notice what others ignored, and strong enough to make it impossible to ignore any longer. I didn't expect things to move quickly. The system rarely does, especially when the wounds are invisible and the bruises sit beneath the skin of memory. But the school had sent their report. The counselor had filed hers. And when the guardian ad litem called, she had already spoken with Lily's teacher, her music instructor, and the neighbor across the street who had once seen Lily rinsing bleach buckets in the driveway. It was never just one thing. It never is. They asked me if I'd be willing to appear for a hearing. It wasn't a custody battle, not yet, just a motion for review, an inquiry into temporary placement, the kind that often gets delayed or dismissed unless someone insists, and I insisted. Fletcher was served notice. He had 2 weeks to respond. He didn't. Doreen sent a message, short and brittle, said it was ridiculous, that they didn't have time to play games, that I was poisoning their child against them. I didn't reply. Instead, I reviewed the folder again, the receipts, the photos, the notes from Lily's journal where she drew herself sleeping on the floor, smiling because it was quiet there, the small statements that look like nothing to people who've never had to earn stillness. When the hearing date arrived, I wore the same navy blue dress I'd worn to George's memorial, not out of grief but gravity. I arrived early, sat alone. A young clerk offered me coffee. I declined. My hands were already steady. The judge was a woman about my age. Her voice held the kind of experience you don't get from books. She asked a few simple questions. She read through the statements. She didn't ask why Fletcher hadn't shown up. She didn't need to. When the recommendation was read aloud, it wasn't dramatic. No gavel slam, no headlines, just a quiet legal affirmation of what we already knew. Lily would remain with me under continued temporary guardianship, subject to review every 6 months. School enrollment would shift. Medical decisions would rest with me. Any future visitation would require prior mediation. No one cheered, but I felt something lift from the back of my ribs, a weight I hadn't even known had pressed there so long. Outside the courtroom, I sat for a while in the garden behind the courthouse. It was small, fenced, a few lilies blooming among cracked stone. I watched them bend in the wind, but not fall. At home, Lily didn't ask how it went. She simply asked if we could make the cinnamon bread again, the one with too much sugar on top. We kneaded the dough together in silence, her hands stronger than before. Her laughter came sooner. She asked if she could bring some to her teacher, said she wanted to write a thank you card. That night, I read it after she went to sleep. She had written in uneven letters, "Thank you for believing me. I like it here now." I placed it in the folder next to the court order, not as evidence, but as record of what it meant to be seen, of how systems sometimes catch up, not because someone shouted, but because someone stayed. Fletcher never responded to the judge's ruling. Doreen posted a vague message online about loyalty and betrayal. The family whispered, but no one knocked on my door. And that was fine, because for the first time in a long time, no one else was setting the terms. Doreen sent the invitation by mail, no return address, just a pink envelope with stickers of balloons, and inside a card printed with Lily's name in large cursive. "You are invited to celebrate Lily's 7th birthday," it said. The party was to be held at their house, the place she hadn't stepped foot in since the day we left. There was no mention of me, no note from Fletcher, just a time, a date, and a line that read, "Family welcome." Lily read it once, then handed it back to me. She didn't speak, just walked to the kitchen and took out the mixing bowl. She stood on her stool and asked if we had enough butter. I knew what she meant. We made the same chocolate cake she always chose, the one with sour cream and dark cocoa and too many sprinkles folded in by accident. She cracked the eggs herself this time, carefully, without getting shells in the bowl. Her hands didn't tremble. Her face didn't ask for permission. When the cake cooled, she asked if she could bring it to school the next day. She said they were letting her wear a crown in music class and that her friend Maya wanted to sit next to her during lunch. I told her she could. I packed it in a tin with parchment, tucked 2 forks into the side, and kissed the top of her head. We didn't mention the other party again. At school, they sang for her. Her teacher wrote her name in purple chalk across the board. She came home with a paper crown, glitter smudged on her cheeks, and frosting on her sleeve. She said it was the best birthday she'd ever had. I placed the pink envelope in the bottom drawer, not as a keepsake, just as a reminder that some invitations don't require a reply, that not every celebration deserves your presence, even when your name is printed on the card. Later that week, Doreen posted pictures. Lily, in a stiff dress, standing beside a table with balloons and cousins she didn't mention. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I looked at the photos for a few seconds, then closed the page. Whatever performance had unfolded that day, it wasn't ours. At home, Lily asked if we could make another cake. Not for her this time, for the neighbor's dog, whose birthday she had decided was Friday. I said yes. That evening, I watched her draw a party hat on a napkin and tape it to the kitchen wall. She poured milk into a teacup for the dog, set a biscuit beside it, and sang a birthday song off-key, but with full intention. It was the kind of celebration that needed no audience, just presence. I thought about how birthdays used to be in our family, grand events with matching outfits and too many photos, but little warmth. Lily had unlearned that somehow. She had created something simpler, truer. She went to bed early that night. No sugar crash, no meltdown. Just quiet sleep, arms tucked under her cheek, a small smile still on her lips. And I realized something as I sat alone with a cup of tea in the quiet. She hadn't just been removed from something painful. She had begun building something else, something that didn't need validation, approval, or display. Just space, just love, just enough light to keep growing. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Lily found the photograph. I had been reorganizing the hall closet, the one where George used to keep the winter coats, and I now stored board games and the vacuum. She was digging through a box labeled crafts, looking for a set of googly eyes she swore we had used on a failed sock puppet. The photo had slipped between two pieces of construction paper, curled at the edges, faded with time, but still sharp enough to recognize. George, standing tall, one arm around me, the other on Fletcher's small shoulder. Fletcher couldn't have been older than 7, his face still full, his hair messy, his eyes looking up at the camera with something like trust. Lily held it up, curious. Is that you? I nodded. She looked at it again, tilting her head. Were you a mom? It wasn't a strange question. She had only ever heard me call myself Grandma. She had only seen the version of me that came after, the one who cooked slowly, listened longer, and didn't rush to correct. Yes, I said, I was. She studied the photo a bit longer, then asked if she could keep it. I told her she could, and she slipped it into her coloring book without another word. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask why Fletcher wasn't in our house, or why birthdays came with different kinds of cake. She simply accepted that people become different things in different seasons. Later that day, she placed the photo on the bookshelf beside her drawing of the cat with the crown. Not framed, just propped gently between a pine cone and a paper butterfly. She told me it looked better there, like you're part of the quiet stuff. I understood what she meant. Some roles end before you're ready. Some relationships shift so far they no longer resemble what they once promised. I had once believed motherhood came with permanence, that being someone's mother anchored you to their life forever. But over time, I had learned that love without respect is not duty, it's erosion. Fletcher hadn't called since the hearing. Doreen had posted another vague message about false narratives and ungrateful people, but nothing direct. No one asked how Lily was doing. No one asked if she still sang, or if she still pressed seeds into the windowsill planter. I didn't chase the silence. I had lived through too much noise to mistake absence for loss. Instead, I trimmed the lavender bush by the porch. I fixed the wobbly kitchen stool. I taught Lily how to fold fitted sheets, even though she turned them into capes. We made lentil soup on rainy days and read books aloud with voices that changed for every character. One evening, she asked if I missed being a mom. I said I didn't stop being one. She looked at me like she understood, then climbed into my lap and fell asleep with her hand wrapped around my finger. That night, I sat by the window long after she slept, watching the shadows stretch across the yard. There was no revenge to be finished, no justice to demand, only the quiet knowing that what needed to end had ended, and what remained was enough. Not restored, not repaired, just rerouted. And that was more than I ever expected to find again. It was nearly spring when Doreen came to the door, not with anger this time. No sunglasses, no sharp words or folded arms, just a thin manila envelope and a face that looked like it hadn't slept fully in weeks. She didn't ask to come in. She just held out the envelope like a transaction neither of us wanted to discuss. I thought you should have this, she said. I nodded, took it, said nothing. She lingered, half expecting something, maybe even hoping for it, but I had nothing left to give in that direction. Whatever version of me had once sought closure from her was long gone. She turned to leave, and I closed the door before her heels hit the second step. Inside, Lily was humming to herself, building something from colored blocks. I placed the envelope on the table without opening it. We had cookies in the oven and a puzzle halfway finished. Priorities had changed. That night, after she went to bed, I opened it. Inside were papers I already had, copies of school transfers, medical forms, a form titled Voluntary Non-Interference, signed only by Doreen. There was no apology, no letter, just a signature and a date, formalizing what life had already made true. She wouldn't contest Lily staying with me. It wasn't admission. It wasn't regret. But it was a form of surrender. I filed it away with the others, not for safety, just for order. I didn't call Fletcher. He hadn't tried since December. Not when Lily lost her first tooth. Not when she sang in the school concert. Not when she brought home a gold star with her name spelled right for the first time. That was the part that stung for a moment. Not for me, but for him. He wouldn't remember these days. He had chosen not to. And memory, once lost, doesn't ask permission to fade. Part 12, I never went back, and she never asked me to. The house grew quieter in spring, not with sorrow, but with ease. Lily learned to wake up with her own alarm. She fed the cat. She started correcting my crossword answers. She liked chamomile tea now and told me serious things with a kind of ease that made me pause and wonder how long she'd held them. One afternoon, we were watering the basil, now thick and unruly, when she said, "You don't have to be sad about not being his mom anymore. You're mine now." I didn't answer. I just placed my hand over hers and let the silence speak instead. The invitations stopped. The photos disappeared. The family gatherings moved on without questions. And in a way, I was grateful, because their forgetting made space for our remembering. We celebrated Lily's next birthday with just 2 neighbors and a cake with no name written on top. She said it was the best day of her life. I believed her. And I realized then I hadn't lost a son. I had let go of someone who no longer recognized where he came from. And in that letting go, I found a child who needed a new place to grow. I never went back to that house, not to explain, not to forgive, not even to prove anything, because the truest kind of revenge is never loud. It's living a life so rooted in peace that the noise no longer reaches you. Share your own stories of walking away in the comments. Thank you so much for watching and supporting our channel.